Sergeant makes Royal Guard horse pretty horse guards, Royal Guard, King's Guard, London, 2024. Near Horse Guard's parade, the streets were calm, with only a few sounds breaking the quiet. Distant footsteps, the low hum of traffic far away, and the gentle movement of horses shifting their weight on the stone ground. The Royal Guard had already arrived. This place was familiar to them. They had stood here in all kinds of weather, cold winters, rainy afternoons, and warm summer days crowded with visitors. Today was no different. It was just another duty on the surface, another day of tradition, discipline, and routine. Among the guards was a sergeant who had served for many years. He was not new to this role, and he was not someone who sought attention. His uniform sat perfectly on him, pressed and clean, every detail in place. Years of training showed in the way he stood and moved. His posture was straight, his steps measured, and his face calm. To many people, he looked like the image of authority, quiet, firm, and unchanging. Beside him stood a Royal Guard horse, tall and powerful. The horse had served just as long as many of the soldiers around it. Its dark coat was strong and thick, its muscles visible even while standing still. This horse had seen thousands of faces come and go. It had stood patiently through noise, cameras, laughter, and long hours of stillness. Crowds did not bother it much anymore. It had learned to remain calm no matter what happened around it. As the morning slowly moved forward, a few early tourists began to arrive. Some stood at a distance, watching quietly. Others whispered to each other, excited to see the guards up close. Cameras and phones were lifted, ready to capture photos and short videos. For many visitors, this was a special moment, a chance to see history and tradition standing right in front of them. The sergeant noticed the small changes in the air. He was used to crowds, but he always stayed alert. He looked around briefly, checking his surroundings, then turned his attention back to the horse. From the outside, everything looked fine. The saddle was in place. The straps were secure. The horse stood still, just as it had been trained to do, but the sergeant saw more than most people. He noticed dust along the horse's coat, likely from earlier movement. He saw a few strands of mane that were not sitting neatly. He noticed how the horse shifted slightly, not in discomfort, but as if it was waking fully into the day. These were small things, things many would ignore, but to him they mattered. This was not just a horse for display. It was a partner in duty. The sergeant had worked with many horses over the years, and he understood them well. He knew their habits, their moods, and their needs. He knew that long hours of standing still required patience, not just from the soldiers, but from the animals too. The morning air was cool, and the stone beneath their feet felt solid and cold. The horse breathed slowly, its breath visible for a moment before fading. The sergeant remained still for a short time, allowing the horse to settle. Around them, the city continued to wake up. More footsteps echoed nearby. A bus passed in the distance. The sound of a camera clicking could be heard. Traditionally, guards were expected to remain focused and formal. People often believed they were not allowed to move or react at all. This idea added to the mystery surrounding them. Many visitors thought of the guards as statues, unmoving, silent, and distant. But behind that image was reality. These were people with experience, care, and responsibility. The sergeant knew when to follow strict rules and when a small, thoughtful action was needed. He did not rush. He did not look around for approval. He simply focused on his duty in a deeper sense. He reached slowly toward the horse, careful not to startle it. The movement was calm and controlled. The horse responded naturally, lowering its head slightly, already familiar with his presence. There was trust between them, trust built through time, routine, and care. The sergeant began with gentle adjustments. He checked the straps again, making sure they sat comfortably. He brushed away dust with smooth, practiced movements. Each motion was steady and respectful. The horse remained calm, standing quietly as if it understood what was happening. Nearby, a few tourists noticed this and grew curious. They had expected stiffness and silence, not this quiet moment of care. Some stopped talking. Others leaned forward slightly to see better. A few raised their phones again, sensing that this was something different. The sergeant did not acknowledge the attention. His focus stayed on the horse. He smoothed the mane carefully, guiding it into place. He checked the coat once more, ensuring it looked clean and well kept. This was not about appearance alone. It was about comfort, pride, and respect. The horse shifted its weight gently, then settled again. Its ears moved slightly, responding to sounds around them, but it remained relaxed. The bond between soldier and horse was clear to anyone who looked closely. This was not a rushed task. It was a moment of understanding between two beings sharing responsibility. As time passed, more people arrived at horse guards. The area became busier, but the mood around the sergeant and the horse felt calm. The careful movements continued, unbroken by noise or distraction. It was as if the world slowed down around them for a brief moment. The morning light grew brighter, reflecting softly off the polished equipment and the horse's coat. The transformation was subtle but noticeable. The horse looked refreshed, balanced, and ready. It stood taller not because it was forced to, but because it was comfortable and confident. The sergeant stepped back slightly, observing his work. His expression remained neutral, but there was quiet satisfaction in knowing the horse was ready for the day. This was part of his responsibility, not just to the public, but to the animal beside him. For the visitors watching, this moment stayed with them. They had come expecting tradition and formality, and they still saw that. But they also saw care, patience, and humanity. They saw that behind the uniform was someone who understood that duty went beyond standing still. As the day continued and official duties resumed, the sergeant returned to his position. The horse stood beside him, calm and composed, ready to face another day of service. The crowd continued to grow, but that early morning moment remained special, a quiet beginning that many would remember long after they left. This was how the day started at Horse Guards in London. Not with noise or ceremony, but with care, attention, and respect, setting the tone for everything that would follow. As the morning moved forward, the area around Horse Guards Parade became busier. More people arrived, filling the space with quiet excitement. Some had planned this visit for weeks, while others had stumbled upon it during their walk through London. Voices mixed with footsteps, and the sound of cameras clicking became more common. Still, the guards held their positions with focus and discipline. The sergeant remained steady beside the horse. From a distance, he looked just like the others, formal, serious, and still. But inside his mind, he was fully aware of every detail around him. He listened to the sounds of the city, watched the movement of people, and stayed alert to the horse's behavior. This was not just standing for show. It was active awareness. The horse shifted slightly again, a small movement that most people would not notice. The sergeant felt it immediately. Years of experience had trained him to understand these small signs. The horse was calm, but it had been standing for a long time already. The ground was hard and the air was slowly warming. These were small challenges, but they mattered. The sergeant waited for the right moment. He knew the rules well and he respected them. At the same time, he understood that caring for the horse was part of his responsibility. When the moment came, he moved with purpose, not rushed, not slow, just right. He stepped closer to the horse again, keeping his movements smooth and controlled. The horse recognized him and responded with quiet trust. There was no fear, no tension. The bond between them had been built over many days like this, through routine and consistency. He checked the equipment once more, ensuring everything sat correctly. He adjusted a strap slightly so it would not rub. He brushed along the horse's side with careful strokes, removing any remaining dust. Each movement showed attention and respect. The horse stood patiently, breathing evenly, its eyes calm. A small group of tourists nearby noticed what was happening. At first, they whispered among themselves, unsure if this was allowed. Some had heard stories that guards were not meant to move or interact at all. Seeing this moment challenged what they thought they knew. One woman quietly pointed toward the horse, her face soft with interest. A man beside her lowered his phone slightly, choosing to watch instead of record. A child stood still, eyes wide, focused on the calm exchange between the sergeant and the horse. The sergeant did not look at the crowd. He did not smile or react. His focus remained on the task. For him, this was not a performance. It was part of the job, done with care and pride. The horse lifted its head slightly as the sergeant adjusted the mane again, guiding it into a neat position. The movement was gentle, almost rhythmic. The horse seemed to relax even more, settling its weight evenly on the ground. Time passed quietly during these moments. The usual rush of the city felt distant. Even though people continued to move around, the space around the sergeant and the horse felt calm, almost protected. It was a rare pause in a busy place. The sergeant stepped back again to check everything. The horse now looked clean, balanced, and ready. Its coat caught the light, showing strength and care rather than tiredness. This was not just about looking good for visitors. It was about making sure the horse felt comfortable and respected. As he returned to his position, the sergeant stood tall, his expression unchanged. The horse stood beside him, calm and steady. Together, they formed the familiar image that visitors came to see. But now, some people understood that there was more beneath the surface. The crowd continued to grow. People spoke in different languages, sharing their excitement and surprise. Some discussed the moment they had just seen, describing it quietly to others who had arrived later. A few people searched online, trying to learn more about the guards and their horses. The sergeant noticed none of this outwardly, but he was aware that the moment had been seen. He did not mind. His concern was never about attention. It was about doing his duty the right way. Standing still again, he allowed his thoughts to settle. He thought about the many mornings he had spent here, the changing seasons, and the countless faces that had passed by. Each day was similar, yet no 2 days were exactly the same. The horse shifted its ears slightly, responding to a distant sound. The sergeant remained calm, offering quiet reassurance through his steady presence. The horse trusted him, and that trust was important. It allowed both of them to perform their roles without stress. For many people watching, this moment stayed with them. They had expected distance and strictness, but they had seen care and understanding. It changed the way they looked at the guards. These were not just symbols of tradition. They were people carrying responsibility with thought and respect. As the hours continued, the sergeant and the horse remained ready. They stood through noise, movement, and changing light. The early care given to the horse made a difference. It stood comfortably, focused and calm, even as the crowd grew louder. The sergeant remained watchful, aware of both his surroundings and his partner beside him. His role required strength, discipline, and patience. It also required kindness, even when no one was watching. This part of the day passed without any major event, but it was important all the same. It showed that duty was not only about rules and appearance. It was about understanding, attention, and respect, for tradition, for people, and for animals. By the time midday approached, the scene at Horse Guards Parade was fully alive. Yet that earlier moment of quiet care still shaped everything that followed. It had set a tone, reminding those who witnessed it that even in the most formal places, simple acts of care matter. The sergeant stood firm, the horse steady at his side, both ready for whatever the rest of the day would bring. As the day moved deeper into the afternoon, the atmosphere around Horse Guards Parade changed again. The calm of the morning had slowly given way to steady movement and sound. The space was now filled with visitors from all over the world. Some stood quietly, taking in the scene. Others spoke excitedly, pointing toward the guards and the horses. The air felt warmer and the light from the sky shifted, creating soft shadows across the ground. The sergeant remained in position, standing beside the horse with the same focus he had shown all morning. Time passed slowly when standing still, but he was used to it. His breathing stayed steady, his posture firm. Every now and then he shifted his weight slightly, carefully and subtly, so as not to disturb the formality of his role. The horse stood strong and calm, but the long hours were beginning to show in small ways. Its muscles tightened slightly, then relaxed again. Its ears moved often, responding to sounds nearby. These were natural signs, not signs of trouble, but the sergeant noticed them all. He had learned to read these signals over many years. The ground beneath them remained hard, and standing in one place for too long was never easy, even for a trained horse. The sergeant understood this well. He did not panic or rush. Instead, he remained aware, ready to respond if needed, but always calm. The crowd continued to change as people came and went. Some visitors stayed for only a few minutes before moving on. Others remained longer, watching carefully, trying to understand the rules and traditions. Children asked questions. Adults whispered explanations. Many believed the guards could not move at all, and they watched closely to see if that was true. From time to time, a loud sound echoed nearby, a bus passing, a sudden shout, or the click of a dropped object. Each time, the horse reacted only slightly, lifting its head or shifting its ears. The sergeant stayed steady, offering quiet reassurance through his presence alone. The trust between them held firm. At one point, the sun broke through the clouds, warming the space. The horse's coat caught the light again, showing the careful grooming done earlier. The sergeant noticed this and felt reassured. The horse was holding up well, and the earlier care had made a real difference. Some visitors who had arrived later began to notice the bond between the sergeant and the horse. They saw how closely he watched it, how aware he was of its movements. This was not something taught in books alone. It came from experience, patience, and respect. A small group of tourists stood nearby for a long time, quietly observing. One person commented softly that the horse looked calm despite the noise. Another nodded, pointing out the way the sergeant stood close, ready but relaxed. They were beginning to see more than just a uniform and a trained animal. The sergeant remained focused on his role, but he could sense the attention. He did not mind. What mattered to him was doing his duty properly. He believed that how one treated others, human or animal, reflected who they truly were, even when no one was watching. As the afternoon continued, the pace of the crowd slowed slightly. The excitement of arrival gave way to quiet observation. People stood longer, watching the guards with more patience. The space felt less rushed, more thoughtful. The horse took a deeper breath, then settled again. The sergeant noticed and adjusted his stance just enough to remain comfortable. These small changes were important. They helped both of them remain steady and focused. The sound of distant footsteps and voices blended into a steady background noise. Above it all, the presence of the guard and horse remained strong and calm. They were part of the setting, but also something more, a reminder of tradition, care, and responsibility. At times, the sergeant's thoughts drifted briefly to his past. He remembered earlier days of training, learning to stand still for long periods, learning how to work with horses, learning patience. He remembered mentors who had taught him that discipline did not mean coldness. It meant control, awareness, and respect. He brought his focus back to the present just as he had been trained to do. The horse stood beside him, steady and reliable. They had faced many long days like this together, and each one strengthened their bond. The crowd continued to shift. New faces replaced old ones. Some people smiled, others looked thoughtful. A few left quietly, carrying the memory of what they had seen with them. The sergeant remained aware of the time, the weather, and the horse's condition. He knew when duty would change, when rest would come. Until then, his responsibility remained clear. For those watching, this long stretch of the day revealed something important. It showed that true strength was not loud or dramatic. It was calm, steady, and patient. It was the ability to remain focused while caring for another being. The horse stood tall, its presence strong and reassuring. It had been prepared well, and that preparation showed now. The earlier moments of care had created comfort that lasted through the long hours. As the light began to soften again, the atmosphere shifted once more. The day was moving toward evening, and with it came a quieter mood. People spoke more softly. The air cooled slightly. The sergeant and the horse remained steady, almost unchanged by the passing hours. Their stillness became a point of calm in a busy place. It drew people in, encouraging them to slow down and observe. This part of the day did not bring excitement or sudden events, but it brought understanding. It allowed people to see the deeper meaning behind the tradition. It showed that duty was not only about rules and appearance, but about awareness, patience, and care. As the afternoon faded, the sergeant remained ready, focused, and calm. The horse stood beside him, strong and trusting. Together, they carried the weight of tradition with quiet dignity, preparing for whatever the next part of the day would bring. As the day moved closer to evening, the feeling at Horse Guards Parade began to change once again. The sunlight softened, casting longer shadows across the ground. The air cooled slightly, bringing relief after the warmth of the afternoon. The crowd slowly thinned, though a steady number of visitors still remained, hoping to catch one last glimpse of the guards before the day ended. The sergeant remained at his post, standing firm beside the horse. After many hours of duty, his body felt the strain, but his focus did not fade. He had learned long ago how to manage long periods of stillness. His breathing stayed calm, his posture steady. He understood that his presence alone offered reassurance to the public and to the horse beside him. The horse had now been standing for a long time, and small signs of tiredness appeared. Its weight shifted gently from one leg to another. Its ears moved more often, responding to distant sounds and nearby footsteps. These were natural signs, and the sergeant noticed every one of them. He knew this part of the day well. Late afternoon and early evening often tested both soldier and horse. The excitement of the crowd had faded, replaced by quiet observation. This was when attention and care mattered most. The sergeant waited for the right moment, watching closely. He did not act without reason. When he sensed that the horse needed a brief adjustment, he moved calmly and confidently. His steps were slow and deliberate, showing control and purpose. He reached out with care, adjusting the horse's stance just enough to offer relief. The movement was gentle, practiced, and respectful. The horse responded immediately, settling more comfortably. Its breathing became deeper, more relaxed. A few visitors nearby noticed this moment and paused to watch. They had spent much of the day observing the guards from a distance, but now they saw something more personal. The interaction was quiet and simple, yet meaningful. The sergeant did not speak. Words were not needed. His actions showed understanding built over years of working closely with horses. He knew how important these small moments were in maintaining calm and trust. The horse lifted its head slightly, then lowered it again, showing acceptance and comfort. The bond between them was clear. This was not just a trained animal following commands. It was a partner responding to care. As the sergeant returned to his position, he stood tall once more. The horse stood beside him, now more at ease. The long hours had not broken their focus. Instead, the shared understanding strengthened their presence. The crowd grew quieter as the evening approached. Some people spoke in low voices, while others simply watched in silence. The busy energy of earlier hours had faded, replaced by a calm atmosphere. Even the sounds of the city seemed softer. The setting sun painted the scene in warm tones. The horse's coat reflected the light, and the polished equipment shone gently. The sergeant's uniform remained crisp, a symbol of tradition and discipline. Visitors who had stayed throughout the day reflected on what they had seen. Many had arrived expecting formality and distance. Instead, they had witnessed patience, care, and respect. It changed the way they viewed the guards and their role. The sergeant remained focused, but his awareness extended beyond himself. He monitored the horse's comfort, the movement of the crowd, and the shifting environment. This level of attention was part of his responsibility, even if it went unnoticed by most. The horse stood quietly, its strength still evident despite the long day. The care given earlier continued to make a difference. Its calm presence reflected the trust it had in the sergeant. As the light continued to fade, a gentle stillness settled over Horse Guard's parade. People slowed their movements, taking in the scene as if they sensed the day was reaching an important moment. The sergeant's thoughts stayed in the present. He did not dwell on the hours already past or the hours still to come. His training had taught him to focus on now, to do his duty fully moment by moment. The horse responded to this calm focus. Its posture remained steady, its movements controlled. Together, they created a sense of balance in the space around them. For those watching, this was the most powerful part of the day. Not because of any dramatic event, but because of the quiet strength displayed. It showed that real leadership and responsibility were often silent. A child nearby whispered to a parent, pointing at the horse. The parent smiled softly, explaining how the guards cared for their animals. This simple conversation carried the lesson forward, passing understanding from one person to another. The sergeant remained still as the sky darkened further. Evening lights began to glow in the distance. The city prepared for night, but the sense of calm at Horse Guard's parade remained. The horse shifted its ears one last time, then stood completely still. The sergeant's presence offered reassurance without touch or words. This was the result of trust built over time. As the day reached its final phase, the moment felt complete. The long hours, the care, the patience, all of it had led to this quiet balance. The sergeant and the horse stood together, representing not just tradition but understanding and respect. This part of the day reminded everyone watching that true strength often appears in simple actions. A steady stance, a gentle adjustment, a calm presence. As evening fully arrived, the sergeant remained ready for the next transition. The horse stood beside him, calm and composed. The day had tested both of them, but they had met it together. With dignity and care, night slowly settled over London, bringing a calm end to the long day at Horse Guard's parade. The sky darkened into deep shades of blue, and the lights around the area began to glow softly. The busy sounds of the city did not disappear completely, but they became quieter, slower, as if the world itself was taking a breath. The sergeant remained at his post, just as focused as he had been since morning. Long hours had passed, yet his discipline held strong. His body felt tired, but his mind stayed clear. He understood that the final part of the day was just as important as the beginning. Care did not stop when the crowd thinned or when the light faded. The horse stood beside him, calm and steady. After a full day of duty, it showed signs of wear but also strength. Its breathing was slow and even. Its posture remained balanced. The trust between the horse and the sergeant was clear, stronger now after sharing so many hours together. Only a few visitors remained. Some stood quietly, taking photos in the evening light. Others simply watched, feeling that this was a moment not to rush. The space felt peaceful, almost respectful. Those who were still there sensed they were witnessing something meaningful, even if they could not fully explain it. The sergeant stayed alert, aware that duty would soon change. He knew when the shift would end, when the horse would be guided away for rest. Until then, his role remained the same. Responsibility did not fade with daylight. When the time came, the change happened smoothly. There was no noise, no sudden movement. The transition was calm, practiced, and careful. The sergeant moved with purpose, guiding the horse gently. The horse followed without hesitation, trusting every step. This moment marked the quiet end of a long day. No crowd reacted loudly. No cameras flashed wildly, yet it felt important. The work had been done with care from start to finish. As the horse was led away, the sergeant remained composed. He checked once more that everything was in order. His actions showed respect, not only for tradition, but for the animal that had stood beside him all day. The horse responded calmly, its steps steady as it moved away from the parade ground. Away from the noise and attention, it would finally rest. This was the reward for its patience and strength. The remaining visitors watched in silence. Some felt a sense of closure, as if they had seen the full story unfold from morning to night. Others smiled softly, moved by what they had witnessed. The sergeant took one last look at the space where he had stood for so many hours. The ground was quiet now. The air felt cool and still. The long day had ended, but its meaning remained. As he walked away, his posture stayed upright, his expression calm. He did not think of praise or attention. He thought of duty completed properly. For him, that was enough. Elsewhere, those who had watched earlier shared the moment with others. Some spoke about the care shown to the horse. Others shared photos and stories online, describing what they had seen. The moment spread quietly, not as spectacle, but as something genuine. People who saw these stories felt something shift. Their view of the Royal Guard deepened. They no longer saw only uniforms and strict rules. They saw patience, kindness, and responsibility. They saw that tradition could carry warmth as well as discipline. For the horse, the day ended peacefully. It was cared for, rested, and treated with the same respect it had received all day. The bond formed through shared duty continued beyond the public eye. For the sergeant, the experience was familiar, yet meaningful. He had done what he believed was right. He had honored his role fully. That quiet satisfaction stayed with him. Horse Guard's parade returned to stillness. The lights reflected softly on stone and metal. The space that had been filled with voices and movement now felt calm and open. The story of that day did not end there. It lived on in memory, in the minds of visitors, in shared conversations, and in the understanding that small actions can leave lasting impressions. What made the day special was not ceremony or command. It was the simple act of care shown again and again, the steady attention, the respect given without needing recognition. In a world that often moves too fast, this moment reminded people to slow down, to notice, to understand that strength can be gentle and duty can include kindness. The sergeant and the horse had played their parts quietly without drama, yet their actions spoke clearly. They showed that real service is not only about standing firm, but about caring deeply. As London moved into night, the day closed with a sense of completeness. Nothing extraordinary had happened, yet everything felt meaningful. And for those who witnessed it, the memory stayed. A true real-life story of trust, patience, and quiet dignity that did not need words to be understood.